Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's WCMA members only free webinar. This month, we are covering sustainability and a topic that is really foundational to starting your sustainability efforts, optimizing sustainability with materiality assessments. So in this webinar, we have a lot of great content from a lot of wonderful speakers. So we'll get started right away. Before we do, I want to make sure that we give a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. Please keep your mics muted during the webinar so we can avoid any interruptions. However, we will have time for Q&A at the end of our session today with our presenters. If you think of questions along the way, please feel free to add those in the chat and we'll make sure we cover them at the end of the webinar. Otherwise, you can wait until the end. If you think of questions then during our Q&A session, you'll have time to unmute yourself and ask those questions of our presenters. We will be recording this webinar for future, for watching later for WCMA members. So just know that if you miss something, if you're taking notes and you'd like to go back to a slide or something else, we will share a copy of that recording and resources and contacts later in the week. So watch for that in your email from me. With that, I will turn things over now to WCMA's Grants and Business Programs Director, Danica Nelsestuen. Danica?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on this webinar with us. As Grace mentioned, we're excited to cover this foundational topic for sustainability. As many of you know, sustainability has been an incredibly important topic for us here at WCMA. It has been the featured subject at both CheeseCon and Cheese Expo over the last couple of years. And we've been working really hard over the last 6 or 7 months to start our own sort of materiality journey as we're kind of figuring out what is the best way to offer sustainability programming to WCMA members. Next slide. So today we've got amazing speakers. I'm so excited about our partnership with these groups. So first up, we're going to have Jennifer Block with the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. Then Kaitlyn Harbort from Foremost Farms, Sushil Rajagopalan from Harbort Environmental, and then I'll close up at the end to kind of talk about next steps in WCMA's sustainability programming. Slide. Okay, you can go to the next one, Gracie. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so I want to talk just very briefly about how WCMA got to this point here and why we are starting with materiality as the topic that we're kicking off our 2024 programming. So we spent the summer doing a lot of research, meeting with partners, talking to members about what they were doing in sustainability and what was important to them, and working with experts like Jennifer over at the Innovation Center and figuring out what was the best way to start our programming for sustainability. In September, we launched a member survey and we had 72 members respond to that survey. In October, we did a lot of internal assessment about current WCMA programming. What are we already doing and what should we be doing as a next best step? We held a members webinar in November to go over some of the ideas that we had and get additional feedback. And then in December, received approval from our board of directors to move forward with our proposal. So what did we learn? There is overwhelming interest from WCMA members to participate in programming related to sustainability. Our members were interested in both webinars and in-person engagements. And 76% of our survey respondents said that they already have customers requesting them to report up data or engage in sustainability practices. But interestingly, only 35% of respondents have actually done a materiality assessment. So materiality, we decided, is the best place to start. So with that being said, I'm excited to have Jennifer Block from the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy to speak next. She's going to cover a little bit about what they do and why dairy processors should be thinking about this.
Thanks so much, Danica. It's really great to see everyone here today. You know, The Innovation Center was formed 17 years ago to convene the dairy value chain around a pre-competitive sustainability and social responsibility platform. When we started our efforts, we knew we had to report U.S. dairy's impact in a transparent way using globally accepted standards like Global Reporting Initiative. Since then, environmental social governance considerations and policies, known as the acronym ESG, have become commonplace in today's business environment across all industries. If your company strives to be a leading consumer brand, or has a need to access capital, or sell to a publicly traded company, especially in the EU, or through a retailer with ESG expectations, you are likely to be asked to transparently disclose or report your ESG impacts in a structured way. ESG criteria are used by institutional investors to assess a company's ability to execute its business strategy and create long-term value, as investors are increasingly see a strong link between corporate sustainability and financial performance and improvement. ESG reporting is designed in a way companies can better understand and communicate the impacts of a company's business activities on the environment and society, and it sets out a framework for companies to assess the risks and opportunities they face. Materiality, wow, you're great, Grace. Fantastic, thank you. ESG reporting is designed in that way that you can better communicate those impacts and those on environment, society, and sets out a framework for companies to assess the risks and opportunities they face. Materiality is an important first and regular step in ESG reporting criteria. Although the terms ESG and materiality assessment may feel new to many of us, the concept of materiality has been around for about 25 years, since the first draft of the Global Reporting Initiative guidelines back in 1999. And materiality assessments are foundational for many reporting standards like Global Reporting Initiative and regulatory directives like the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Why you're getting asked by all of your customers to start telling them about what's materially important to you and reporting on goals and other things. But you shouldn't look at materiality as a chore, right? It's really beneficial for companies, as a materiality assessment provides insights into future trends, contributes to the company's overall risk assessment, and monitors the topics that are important to stakeholders. Completing and regularly updating your company's materiality assessment will help you focus on your ESG efforts and the issues that matter most. Any of you that have also tried to access capital to get some improvements done may find that having a materiality assessment helps further your efforts in that area as well. And it can improve your organization's overall performance and reduce risk. It also helps companies communicate their ESG performance to their stakeholders clearly and concisely. So you should be partnering with your communications team when you think about doing materiality, because it's very much directed to how you're also going to report in the future. And if you go to the next slide, Grace, you will hear from Sushil later on in the webinar, so I won't belabor it, but the Innovation Center conducted its first materiality assessment for US Dairy in 2019, and we updated it with the version you can see here on this slide in 2021. We'll also be updating it again over the next 12 to 18 months, as more things have come into play that we might need to look at, both in the environmental spectrum and in the social responsibility spectrum. And we published a guide for dairy companies who are embarking on doing their own assessment. So with that, I'd love to hand over to Kaitlyn, who's already done some of this fantastic work at Foremost Farms.
Thanks, Jen. So I think that I'm actually going to support a lot of what you were just showcasing, because we heavily relied on the resources from the Innovation Center for US Dairy. But to everybody in the crowd today, my name's Kaitlyn. I'm our Corporate Sustainability Program Manager for Foremost Farms, and I'm here to talk to you about our journey from actually executing the materiality assessment and using those insights coming out of the materiality assessment to actually formulate a sustainability program at Foremost Farms that's authentic to who we are, who we serve as our members, and the customers that we serve globally. So if we want to progress to the next slide. So just an intro. Alrighty, so let's talk about why we did a materiality assessment, because everything that Jen said is 100% rings true to exactly why we felt we wanted to undergo this assessment. So sustainability started taking a really prominent role, especially in the business space. And that's when we started to look into what do we need to do to really refine our approach. So the first thing that we noticed was that sustainability in the context of our employees was really only tethered to the concept of recycling. And this was a really big barrier for us to break down and really emphasize that sustainability is cross-functioning across environmental, social, and governance principles, but it kept us driving us back to that recycling stance. The second was there was a really large disenfranchisement with our employees and even our members. And how can I, as an individual contributor, support the concept of sustainability in our business? So things from the media, like becoming multiplanetary species or Tesla, they really made individuals feel like they didn't know how to contribute through the work or the roles that they have. And so we were noticing that there was a general lack of understanding in terms of how do we execute at Foremost Farms on sustainability that makes sense for us. And then something that I'm sure a lot of folks in the crowd today have felt is the flavor of the day effect. So there are so many different topics, issue areas related to sustainability and specifically in the lens of environmental social governance. And we just recognize that every single day we were getting different requests for partnerships or for programming or initiatives, and they didn't fit who we were as a cooperative. They didn't fit our location or the operations we were engaged in or where we fell in the supply chain. And so what we were seeing was really half-baked results that weren't generating the value for the environment and society that our customers had hoped, and were really costing our organization a lot of time, money, and resources. And so these three driving forces all together are what led us to want to look into what does a materiality assessment entail and what kind of value can this create for our organization. So we want to move to the next slide. When we look at the process we underwent for the materiality assessment, and I'm sure Jen's smiling right now, but the Innovation Center, they have created this fantastic resource that physically outlines a blueprint from how you go from concept to practice. And the greatest thing is that it's underpinned by global frameworks like the Global Reporting Initiative. You know it has that credibility and that global validity, but it already has the dairy lens applied to it. So you're not having to go into this reinventing the wheel on your own. You can physically apply the process that they've gone through and has been tried and true for the industry and apply that to your organizational process in specific. And so when we look through walking through these steps, I just want to demystify what this actually entailed for us, because sometimes I think folks are not truly understanding what the materiality assessment looks like and what that end objective is. So when we started in the preparation phase, this was just starting to get our bearings together and say, who do we need to get to the table to have this conversation and move this assessment forward, as well as what's really our objective for doing this materiality assessment. Because as Jen alluded to, there are a lot of different reasons in why you might do a materiality, whether it be customer requests or investor and financial institutions, understanding risk. And for us, it was really to say, what does sustainability mean in the identity of Foremost Farms? And what can we have really the greatest impact with using our unique capabilities as a cooperative? And so we went into this process understanding who we needed to bring to the table to move the assessment forward and why we were doing it. We then again leveraged the Innovation Center's guidance to a T. We physically followed every single step throughout the process from start to finish, which helped make the concept a reality. So we then moved to the completion phase, which was actually engaging our stakeholders. And so this can take a lot of different formats, whether it's a direct interview, a roundtable conversation, a survey, however you want to do that information gathering. But for us, it was through the form of a survey that we dispersed directly through Microsoft Forms. We were able to house the data in and then pull it out later to do the analysis. Then we moved into the application phase where we physically took the insights from our materiality assessment, those top environmental social areas that we can have true impact on, and we use those to drive actionable outcomes at the organization and continue to move the needle on the successes and the commitments we've pledged to uphold. And then finally, we're in the ongoing monitoring phase. So something Jen mentioned is doing those materiality refreshes. That's something that we've defined as a cadence of every 3 years, just to make sure we're considering emerging trends, and that we're maintaining what we can be the best at and have the greatest impact to, but also that our customers and our consumers really want us to be the best at as well. So if we want to progress to the next slide, this is the image of our materiality assessment process. So from start to finish, it took us about roughly 9 months, but I've heard of companies taking anywhere from 2 months all the way to a year based on how thorough you want to be with each individual process. And so if we just walk through this process flow, you can see at the top, we identified that key committee that was going to be the funnel for our materiality assessment. What topics were we going to serve on? How are we going to engage with stakeholders? What different kind of communication channels were we going to use? Those were all conversations we had through our Sustainability Council, our committee, and our executive leadership team. So then when we look at the list of issues that we actually surveyed our stakeholders on, those are all going to be down in the bottom blue box. So you can see everything from environmental, social, governance, economic perspectives included in this list. But essentially, these are the topics that you're trying to identify. Where can, again, we have the greatest impact and influence using our capabilities of where we're located and who we engage with. We then dispersed our survey to our stakeholders, and you can see in front of you that our stakeholders were our employees, our members, our customers, suppliers, and industry and trade associations. And we used the insights from that survey and physically mapped them on a graph to identify where are those issues that we have the highest impact, the highest capability to influence, but are also the most important to our stakeholders. So that's where you see that tier 1 issues at the top corner. Those are what we really want to focus on. It's not to say that we're not considering the topics that fall within the tier 2 and tier 3, but it's saying that we have the most rigor towards those tier 1 issues, and that's where we can drive the greatest impact in, again, using our operational capabilities and the stakeholder relationships we have. So if we progress to the next slide, this is the outcome of our materiality assessment. And what is so fantastic about this is we now know at Foremost Farms what sustainability means to us as a cooperative. We know that when we talk about sustainability with our employers and when we talk, or excuse me, our employees, and when we talk about it with our members, we know what it feels like, what it looks like, and what we've held ourselves to. So it's not this obscure concept of, do we have to get a rocket ship to Mars, or do we have to make packaging from banana peels? But we really know that to be sustainable as an organization, we need to prioritize the farmer livelihood of the members we support, the compliance of the operations in that we're running, and the product safety and quality of the dairy products we're sending to the consumer marketplace. So if we progress to the next slide, something I really want to prioritize in this process is you saw that application phase was really phase 4 of the materiality assessment process. And that's because up until this point, you as an organization have identified where can I have the greatest impact, as well as what does sustainability mean to me. But now you need to take those insights and you need to use those to drive actionable outcomes in your organization and create programming around those key commitment areas. And so we at Foremost have created a governance structure to do just that, because it's not enough to just do the materiality assessment and develop a really nice PDF that showcases your commitment areas, but you really need to use those and leverage those to act upon them, to share your story, to share your management systems, to share your processes, so that, again, your customers or the financial institutions in which you're trying to provide this information for are getting reassurance that you're actually taking those steps to plan, do, check, act, and you're continuing to improve on those commitment areas you've set for yourself. So as you're going through this process, don't think about the materiality assessment in silo. That's something that I feel really passionate about, is you need to think about your sustainability program as a larger program in your organization. What do you want this to look and feel like? Because again, when we look at our Sustainability Council, they were a core part of going through this entire process. And to this day, they're still heavily involved in the outcomes of the materiality assessment in terms of goal setting, reporting, and again, driving progress. So please, as you're going through this, consider what other elements you're going to need to be putting in place, because the materiality assessment is just one foundational piece that's going to lead into your further programming. So last slide I'd like to show you is now what we've used our materiality insights to create. And you heard Jen talk a lot about the Global Reporting Initiative. And so because we did that materiality assessment and we identified what's most important to our stakeholders, where can foremost have the greatest impact, we're now able to report in alignment with those key commitment areas. We now have more synthesized reporting that showcases our readers, here are our key areas, here's what we're doing to uphold our commitment, and here are the metrics that we're using to measure if we're being successful or not. Rather than just giving a one-pager that shows one-off philanthropic events or really great community engagement opportunities that we're engaging in, we're providing a more robust report that connects data, measurement, as well as management practices all together and showcases how our sustainability commitments are supporting our purpose to bring dairy to life, rather than feeling like another foreign layer of business process that doesn't necessarily fit with who we are as an organization. And so as you go through this, just remember the materiality assessment should be unique to you. It should support your core business area and your aspirations as a dairy organization. And it's intended to lift dairy up as a community together so that we can really tell our story in a way that's impactful. And again, reassure our customers and our consumers that dairy is doing the right thing related to environmental and social responsibility. So with that, I'll pass it to Sushil to talk about the Harbor side of this process.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. That was great, in fact. You should be doing what I'm going to say. That was that great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sushil Rajagopalan, and I am with Harbor Environmentals. I'm a senior project manager here, and can we go to the next slide and just... Yeah. So what is Harbor and what's my role? I just want to quickly, briefly touch on that. Harbor is a consulting group that is based out of Arkansas, but we have staff working all across the country. Example, me, I am based out of Boston. I'm from within Harbor, I'm from the sustainability group where we help clients across various sectors, including food and beverage, metal mining, in developing their ESG strategy, right from understanding what sustainability is, what is ESG, what does it mean for their business, across the various steps in that sense is like what is a materiality, and then helping them with their GHG accounting, their life cycle analysis, and again going into the strategy building. What do you do with this information? And of course, how do you capture that information to software administration? And of course, big part of it is like doing their external reporting as well. So this is what we do. And as you can see within the image, it's like we say strategic framework, goal setting, reporting, improvement adjustments. These are all the key areas or touch points that we help clients all across the sector. But within very specifically dairy, that is where my role comes in. It's like Harbor has been associated with US dairy companies for more than 6 or 7 years, and have been working across the strategic framework, as I mentioned, and also been closely associated with Innovation Center for US Dairy in their stewardship commitment efforts. In that sense, we also help a lot of these companies understand what they need to do, what kind of data do they need, what kind of data that they need to provide, how do they collect this data, and what do they use this data for. And of course, a lot of this comes from their understanding of materiality assessment that both Jen and Kaitlyn mentioned. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. Yeah, of course. I mean, the key question is, what is materiality, right? I mean, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and talk more into it because Jen and Kaitlyn quite well put out what these things mean. We just want to say the materiality basically means what is important to an organization, and that can look different for different organizations. For example, if you're a smaller organization with one facility, your materiality might look very different from an organization that has 100 odd facilities. So size and scale actually determine your materiality. But in that sense, what are the key topics or issues very specifically from ESG perspective, that is environmental, social, and governance perspective, that impact your organization and that are important for your stakeholders? And again, these can look very different based on the context of your organizations. For example, looking from environmental perspective, if you're located in a water stress area, of course, those things are going to be important for an organization as against an organization that is not located in that one. So these all things help you to define what issues are important for you, what kind of metrics do you need to track, what kind of reporting do you need to do. And of course, that also helps you build a lot of credibility in that sense through your sustainability reporting. And again, the stakeholder engagement and all these aspects are key pillars that help you create a very credible materiality assessment, as Kaitlyn just mentioned. That is the most important part of it. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Of course, I mean, as we saw, is there a set template for materiality? There is no universally agreed definition or approach for determining material topics, leaving companies to actually feel free to develop their own approach. Again, company need to understand the process in general and then move ahead with their materiality assessment. I would say there are many resources available outside, like as you research on your own materiality, either internally or through your own consultants. These kind of resources are available, but I do have to mention that there are kind of challenges that do not make this exercise a checkbox item. This is kind of a very critical part of your overall journey, and that has to be taken into account while developing your key ESG strategies that is based out of materiality. Can we move on to the next step? Of course, what are the? I mean, that's where the core of it comes in, right? How do we go ahead? How do we approach materiality, and how do we go ahead doing this materiality? Harbort has its approach as well. In that sense, we have done materiality for companies within US dairy, and as well as companies within other sectors, including steel and other areas. How we define this is a 7-step approach. That is, we look at define the scope and objective. That is, what is your objective with your materiality? Someone might be thinking, you know what, my materiality just needs to be focused on North America because that's where my large operations are, or with minor operations somewhere else. And then again, what is your scope of this thing? Are you just looking at certain aspects of your organization? Are you just trying to define it all across your organization? So we also look at these aspects of it before trying to before just as a beginning step of defining what your materiality might look like. So that's where as Kaitlyn also mentioned in that one, they define their team as well. They defined who their team is going to be, who their core structure is going to be, that is going to drive this process internally. Despite whether you have an external consultant or do it within in-house, this step is kind of an important for you to just know where you need to go. And again, the second and for me, the most important step is identifying your stakeholders. Who are your key stakeholders? What are your key institutional frameworks? What are your ideal stakeholder engagement strategies? All this will reflect on the time and effort that you might need. Some organizations might be able to do it in 3 months. From big organizations, it might take, as mentioned before as well, it might take almost a year, because it depends on what your stakeholder engagement strategies are. If you're sending out surveys, what is your time frame for surveys? Who are you sending out these surveys? And if you're talking about your stakeholders, who are you going to engage and how are you going to engage? And also identifying the relationship between the stakeholders are also very important. For example, you could send out a survey to 100 of your employees easily, but engaging with 10 of your customers outside is kind of difficult. And again, how do you rate these opinions that you get from different stakeholders? So having a great stakeholder strategy is kind of very important, and that's where we focus on. If we have a great stakeholder engagement strategy, the next steps kind of become easier and easier. Thirdly is identifying material topic universe. Of course, what are your material topics that affect your industry? This can differ largely, and it can be very varied depending upon which industry you're focused on. Of course, dairy has its own specific set of material issues that have been identified thanks to, of course, Innovation Center and SASB materiality for food beverage industries as well. So those can be an ideal starting point. And then, of course, you can look at your peers. You can look at what kind of your strategies that are there. So that will help you narrow down to a set of material topics. And then comes your engage and assess phase. This is where you will look at what these materiality topics mean to you, like what are the impacts, what kind of impacts do this material topic have on your business and have on your environment. For example, does your organization have a large footprint? Does your organization have does it belong to water risk areas, or what kind of depending upon what kind of materiality topics you have identified, you will try to use that, and then you'll try to do your stakeholder engagement through surveys or whatever means you have identified to engage with your stakeholders. You will try to assess those. You will try to assess those material topics across your stakeholder across your stakeholder relationships and excuse me stakeholder relationships. And again, how do you use that information is where we come to think about producing materiality, using the stakeholder identification approach and engaging and assessing the results that you derive on is where you would where you will produce your materiality. As rightly mentioned, you need to understand what are your thresholds, what are the cutoff points of, okay, this topic is material for us, this topic is not material for us. What do your stakeholder internal team and stakeholders think about these kind of topics? It's where your large efforts would be coming in, and I'm trying to understand and unpack the results that you will get from your stakeholder engagement strategies. So that's where you would do that. And of course, last part of it is, once you have done all this process, is to try to communicate that results. How do you incorporate material issues into your long-term ESG strategies, and what strategies to track, and like what to report on material issues? As Kaitlyn also mentioned, that they have their own KPI scorecards and all those things, which help you not just to understand which material topics are important for you, how do you track them? How do you keep, like, what kind of goals do you set? If you have certain goals, say, for example, we want to reduce our GHG intensities by 20% in 10 years or something like that. How do you track it? All those things become key communication strategies. And that's where your internal communication, PR, relationships team come in to set out this, to help you draft a communication strategy. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Of course, as I said, that Harbor's approach is a kind of a universal approach for materiality assessments, but the US Dairy has its own, like, Innovation Center produced its own materiality guide, which again, which Foremost Farms has followed, and other dairy companies which have done their own materiality have also followed, which Harbor has helped them do. So this follows more or less the same template on, as you said, like conducting an organizational materiality review of the materiality, US dairy materiality, and then building upon it. And how do you really use that material topics for your own purposes? Some of the topics that are relevant at the national level may not necessarily be relevant to you. And some of the topics that you may think are relevant to you may not have been reflected within the national survey. So it's just using that as a base to build your own materiality is really a great resource to have, especially if you're trying to do it on your own. The biggest question is, can you do these kind of exercise on your own or within your own in-house? The answer is absolutely yes. And this is where these kind of external resources and guides do come handy for you to approach the materiality assessment. Can we look at the next slide? As I said, what are the industry-wide material issues? This is where you can use, as I mentioned, the 2021 US Dairies Materiality Grid and SASB's meat, poultry, and dairy industry issues. You can use these kind of material topics to identify or narrow down to a list of issues that you want to assess or that you think are relevant to your own company or your own industry, which will help you actually define your topics as well. How do you define your topics are critical as well. So if you look at here, largely you see from SASB, they provide on a head of environmental, social, human, business model and innovation, and leadership governance. These are all their larger topics, while US Dairy has environmental, social, and economic. So how you define these larger goals or the pillars of your company, ESG strategy pillars of your company, totally depends on what pathways you are intending to take. How do you want to move forward with your ESG strategy, and how can materiality support those ESG strategies? So that has a lot of flexibility over there. But again, these resources will help you just build out your initial material topics from where you can move on to your next steps. Next slide, please. Again, we have to think about not just what it means to do materiality, but also think about how big a materiality exercise is. Materiality is dynamic in nature. For example, a lot of social context, socio-economical context changes. So materiality in that sense, what your materiality reports have been in 2018 could be different from 2022 because of what environmental changes. There are rules and regulations that change. For example, SEC just issued the notification 2 or 3 the last on Friday or something. So of course, for large accelerated filers, it became important or necessary if GHG or an emission, GHG emissions are material issues, they have to report it. So materiality in ways whatever you developed 3 years or 4 years ago can change. So we have to be constantly update those things, constantly be aware of what the changes are within your social, environmental, and governance frameworks within your region, within your country, and develop your materiality and use the materiality accordingly. Again, isolation from do not isolate, thinking about do not isolate it from the rest of your business, because as we know, a lot of us are like a lot of your value chains are connected to each other. So we have to think about materiality from a holistic strategic perspective, because if you just think about one smaller if you have a siloed approach, sometimes you might lose the bigger picture and the materiality won't really yield great results for your own self. So having to think of holistically is very important when you're trying to think about your materiality strategy. Again, stakeholder engagement can be time consuming and costly. As I mentioned, stakeholder engagement is kind of critical and is the pillar, because what materiality tells you basically is what are the important topics that affect your business and are important for your stakeholders. So how you define your stakeholders, how do you engage with them, what are your strategies? These can differ and this can be time consuming depending upon size and scale and depending upon the approach you take. So may want to take into account while you're developing how we go about materiality or your materiality assessments. And lastly, of course, material topics are too broad and overlap. We need to define our materiality topics as well. There are different guides that help you. The US, the Innovation Center's materiality guide has its own way, has defined a lot of the topics that are used within materiality assessment. Similarly, you could use those or also define your own topics. Make sure that they are relevant to your organization. What does product innovation mean? What does human training, what does training mean? So all these things have to be defined while trying to put your material topic, because when you're asking someone to tell you their opinion on are the topics important for you, they need to understand what you mean by those topics as well. So these are some key points that someone has to remember while they're approaching materiality before they actually start their materiality as well. Next slide. And materiality is just the beginning, I would say. For example, this is one of the US dairy companies who finished their materiality assessment late 2022, early 2023, and you could see how how they are looking at their ESG strategy going forward. And you could see right at the beginning, the materiality was their first and foremost step in that sense. And then they developed their entire ESG strategy around, we are going to do this. We are going to move forward with our new ESG reports. We are going to develop new metrics. We are going to do life cycle assessment. So that helped them move forward. The materiality helped them move forward, define, and in terms of creating the ESG strategy. And that was their first step. So you could always, as I said, you should always think about your materiality as the first step and within the holistic picture of your ESG strategy. Again, we are Harbor. We've been helping dairy clients all across United States and in Europe as well in understanding what the ESG strategy should be. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I mean, Danica has our contact ID, and you can always reach out if you have any questions or want to have chat. And what do we do? Because there are a lot of resources, and we are here to. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sushil and Jennifer and Kaitlyn, for presenting today on this really important topic. Other than Googling what does sustainability mean and learning about that, what even is that word? It seems like to me, in my very limited research, that materiality really is the best place to start. So I'm really grateful for your knowledge in this topic and your participation in partnership. So we did this webinar. This was our very first official sustainability program, obviously separate from what we do at the Expo and at CheeseCon for 2024. So what's next for WCMA and our sustainability programming? Next slide. Well, we did this webinar, and so we're officially announcing our next piece of programming for WCMA related to sustainability. So we're going to be doing a workshop in person here in Madison in May called Optimizing Sustainability Materiality Assessment Workshop for Dairy Processors. So we're really excited to be partnering again with Harbort Environmental and the Innovation Center for US Dairy to deliver the content for this workshop. So this is going to be a working shop. There's going to be a lot of learning, right? A lot of listening, but also doing. Why we're calling it a workshop, not a seminar. So we're going to be offering a comprehensive exploration of these key sustainability topics that our speakers today mentioned. You're going to actually be developing your own assessment and learning how to then implement that assessment back at your facility, and then how to take all the information you gathered from your assessment and analyze it, and then put some new things into action at the end. So like I said, it's going to be interactive, in person, hands-on, over 1.5 days here in Madison, May 7th and 8th. There's going to be 2 or 3 virtual follow-up sessions as a group where you'll get together. There'll be programming, but like a half an hour, 45 minutes of programming and additional information, timeline reminders, sort of a touch point for everybody participating. In addition to the programming that we'll be providing that's more structured, you will have access to up to 3 hours of one-on-one consulting time. So you can check in with Sushil, Harbort Environmental, to say, this is a question I have, I'm worried about this, help problem solve. So that is a really great resource that you'll have access to while you start on this journey. At the end of the program, which for us isn't that day and a half, at the end of the full program, so think, 6 months down the road, we anticipate that participants in this program, and it's a little cohort, will have developed and then implemented their first materiality assessment, evaluated their current practices, and identified key sustainability priorities, and are ready to start in on next steps. So we're really excited to offer that. Rebecca from our team will be posting a link to sign up for that. It just went live a few minutes ago to register for that cohort. There is a fee for the first registrant, and then we have a reduced fee if you want to bring a coworker. And all that information is on the website, but always feel free to reach out to us at WCMA if you have any questions. We will be sending out, after you register, a questionnaire, so we can get a really good idea of our attendees, what their company's like, what are they producing, where are they producing it, how much are they producing, just so Innovation Center and Harbor can get a really great idea of who's going to be in the room and better prepare to deliver that content. And then we'll also be sending out information on hotel blocks and stuff like that. So a day and a half starting May 7th, which is a Tuesday. It'll start at 10 a.m. or run till 4. There'll be a WCMA sponsored dinner that night, and then we'll run from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Wednesday, and we will be providing breakfast and lunch. So let's move on to the next slide. The good stuff, Q&A. So as always, when you register for our webinars, we offer the opportunity for attendees to send questions in ahead of time. And given that this is a subject area that our members have been asking us for quite some time, we received a lot of questions ahead of time. So we're going to get through as many as we can, starting with this first question. It's kind of a 2-part question here. We have multiple facilities. Do we do an assessment for each facility or as a organization as a whole? And then how often do we revisit our materiality assessment? How often should we redo it? I feel like any one of our 3 amazing speakers could really answer this, but I'm going to start with Jennifer to maybe give some thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm going to start with the second, actually. How often should we do a materiality assessment? It is best practice to do a materiality assessment at least every 3 to 5 years. The Innovation Center, as I mentioned, did theirs in 2018. We redid it in 2021. So that was about 3 years. That was based on the fact that a lot of things had changed. And like Sushil mentioned, sometimes it's reporting standards that change. And so you need to go back and look within your company and how you're doing things. And again, 2021 to now, we are on the verge of starting to do our third. A lot of things actually have changed, and we're seeing human rights and worker welfare, continuing to be bigger issues. So it's probably necessary we re-examine that. Now, it might not move in our matrix, but it's important to take the time as a US dairy community to come together and analyze that. So that'll just, it's one example, environment. I think we feel like we know, that's going to stay core to what we need to watch and improve and report on. But there are other things, outside that. And regarding if we have multiple facilities, you should be doing a company materiality assessment. So, could that look different? And I'll pick on Cayuga, because Cayuga, who I don't think is on this call, they had two businesses, right? They have Cayuga Milk Ingredients and they have Cayuga Marketing. That's a decision within their own company on whether they should combine those two companies in one assessment, or whether they're thought of as two individual operational. Dairy Gold kind of is the same way. Their co-op, is one way, and then they have the operating structure of their plants is their brand. So, I think you'll find that in most cases, companies that are integrated in one way, shape, or form, even though they may have two operational licenses, look at things holistically, and that's probably an easier way to do it. But there's no right or wrong. It's really what makes sense to your business and your leadership on whether you would do those independently or together. But if you are one company with 10 facilities that are all branded and under the same company, that would all be under one materiality assessment. Kaitlyn, would you agree? Is that how you approached it at Foremost?
Absolutely. One company identity. I think one of the hardest things is with dairy, you see those in the Southwestern that are very focused on water scarcity versus those of us in the Midwest who, although water is obviously something we're focused on, isn't necessarily a pain point. However, I still think to create one uniformed organization with one identity, you should definitely do it one company wide.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. Okay, on to the next one. Do I need to, this might be tough. Do I need to get my materiality assessment verified by an independent organization? And how much would it cost to work with a third party to develop and implement a materiality assessment? So, right, like we're going to be preparing folks at our workshop to go back to your facility and do a first run on your own. But what if you maybe don't have the capacity to do that, or maybe have, a bunch of extra money laying around and you just want to pay somebody else to do it? I don't know. How much does that cost? And are there ways or reasons why you need to have somebody come in and independently verify it? So I'm not sure who wants to take this one first, but I'll maybe kick it over. I don't know. You guys decide who wants to answer this one first.
I'll let Sushil start, and then I'll add something on the end.
Perfect.
Absolutely. I mean, in theory, you do not need your materiality assessment verified by third party, but like for various partnerships or various organizations that you're involved in, they may ask it. If you're just developing as a standalone, technically you do not need it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure Jennifer would be reflecting on it as well. And how much does it cost to work with third party? That depends on the size and scale. There's like not a single cost point of saying, it costs like X amount, but how complex your organization is, how big your supply chain is, what your objectives and goals are. So that's what we assess. So, but just to say, it can take for a consultant anywhere for say 100 to 150 hours, give or take, because the stakeholder engagement, depending upon how big a value chain, can be very complex, and the data analysis as well. So yeah, that's kind of I could only put it in terms of hours or in terms of work needed, months, or instead of a cost, because what we do would be very different for an organization. I hope that was gave somewhat clarity on the. Yep.
Yeah, and I'll add to this, and Kaitlyn might even want to chime in here. So, third party assessment or verification is becoming increasingly required by European based companies because they have requirements through those regulatory standards in the EU. So if you have been asked to be part of an organization called the Sustainable Ag Initiative, Sustainable Dairy Partnership, which there's an acronym SAISDP, they do have a requirement, not at the outset, but as you go through the stages, to demonstrate that it has your materiality assessment has been third party verified. So that if you think that you are going to be exporting into that global market, it probably does make sense to partner with someone like Harbor, because they're there guiding you through the process, and they can also be third party. They can support the third party verification step. So you might find cost savings from just starting with them in the beginning. And then otherwise, I think Kaitlyn can tell you it takes an immense amount of organization to make sure you keep track of every step, every time your board meets, and the minutes reflect that materiality was discussed, because you're going to be required to demonstrate that if you go back and do third-party verification later. Is that fair, Kaitlyn?
Yeah, so I think this goes exactly back to the dynamic piece, the materiality. I think when we did ours first in the early 2022, the conversation around third-party assessment, it really wasn't on the front line, but with what Jen mentioned, a lot of organizations are starting to engage in the Sustainable Dairy Partnership, which is very EU driven, and that is a fundamental piece of going through that process. And so ultimately, as we even look to reevaluate or refresh our assessment in the future, we are making considerations around how can we ensure that we can have this third party verified, more to be able to provide that reassurance for our European-based customers that we have the controllership in place to undergo this process, and that we did so in a way that really is transparent and credible, that there wasn't cherry picking in terms of what topics we wanted to prioritize, that we only included representation with like-minded thoughts or perspectives. And so I think, to mirror what Jen and Sushil is saying, is that it's not something you have to do, but it's like anything. It adds that layer of credibility, and also prepares you to be able to engage in any customer requests that may come down the pipeline that would later on have to make you redo your assessment, which would just be a really arduous process, and probably create a lot of confusion for your organization.
That makes sense. This is a confusing and important topic, isn't it? All right, Grace, next question. Okay, so I think I'm going to start this one with Sushil. He not only is he an expert on materiality, but also an expert on reporting ESG data. So we're very lucky to have him. So if I'm already collecting and reporting data for up to my customers, do I need to go back and do a materiality assessment? Have I already moved on to the next step? From what I have learned, there really is no linear journey and steps. So what do you think about that, Sushil?
No, of course, you definitely have to do it. I mean, as you have to do it, it's good to do a materiality, because your customers may not ask you all the information, right? Just as an example, a customer may not ask you for a water issues, or may not be asking about certain issues, but that may be relevant to your own company. So materiality actually helps you understand what are the topics that are important for your company. So yes, I mean, if your customers are asking you for some information, that's great, because that's for them, because that's important for their company, right? That's why they're asking you. But that does not really reflect that is important for you because you're in business with them, so you have to provide that information. But that does not really represent all the risks or all the topics that are important for you. So yes, I mean, you can still need, when I say need, you still should do a materiality so that you're able to understand it. And I always think materiality, not just from like an environmental perspective, think of it from a risk management perspective, because the environments, when I say environment, not just your physical environment, but all the social, political, economic environments are very dynamic in nature. And we have seen them change rapidly, especially post-COVID. The environment, like how we operate businesses, have been very different. So that being ahead on that curve will of course help you mitigate any risks that you see. So yes, definitely, I would encourage folks to do their materiality, even if they're submitting or collecting some kind of an ESG information, either for their own internal purposes or for reporting.
So Kaitlyn, I know when Jennifer introduced you, she said y'all were kind of flying the plane while you were building it. It sounds like you maybe had this experience where some of this stuff was happening and then you went back then and started the materiality. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely appreciate this question, because I think there's a general difference on the collection and reporting of ESG data versus the materiality, and truly understanding where your biggest areas for impact are. And so for my fellow co-ops and processors on the call, I know Sushil doesn't want to say you need to do a materiality assessment, but you need to do a materiality assessment. This really gives you independence to have more intuitive conversations with your end customers on why are we pursuing a specific initiative, or why are we putting priority around a specific focus area that maybe our customer isn't asking us data for. And it allows you to put more of a narrative to what you're doing rather than just giving a data point. Because we're getting many customer surveys before we started doing the assessment, which was great. It was a data exercise. It pushed us to look at our data controllership, but it didn't have a lot of meaning for us because one data point doesn't define the journey we had over a year or consecutive years. And so if, again, you're shuffling through the flavor of the day and your employees really don't understand what does sustainability mean, do the assessment just to get a sense of understanding and what do my employees want from me as a company? What do my stakeholders want from me as an organization? Because again, the materiality assessment should support you as an organization in your core business areas. And it just gives you more of that authenticity to say, I know what sustainability means to me, and now I'm ready to have a conversation on how we can benefit our organization, the environmental and social systems, but also the wants of our customers. So you don't need to wait to do a materiality to share ESG data, but I would say you do need to do a materiality assessment just to know what sustainability means to you, or you might end up exhausting a lot of time and resources that don't create a lot of impact.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so there's a couple more that came in after the slides were done, and then I didn't want to fuss with them anymore, so I'm going to ask them anyway since we've got a minute. This one is specific for Jennifer. How do I get more involved in what Programming Innovation Center for US Dairy is offering?
Thanks, Annika. Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm delighted that we're able to partner with Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, because it takes a village. And with the amount of cheese and ingredients coming online in this country, and with the amount we already export, we're going to need to export more. And understanding how important sustainability is to us as US Dairy, right? Being able to demonstrate our practices, our efficiencies as a country, as we're out there competing in that global environment, is only going to increase. So thank you first that, we're able to work with Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association to deepen, right, the understanding in the area of sustainability this time of materiality. Super easy. This year, our spring meeting is at the same time as Cheese Expo. So if you're going to Cheese Expo, go to Cheese Expo. Call me. We can set up time, and we can have a webinar, and we can or a Zoom, and we can talk about what pieces you're tripped up on or where you might need help or support. And I can give you resources if we have them, or I can direct you to the folks that do. So again, I think it takes a village, and I just want to say it's great that as US Dairy, we can all come together and help deepen learnings through this type of webinar or through the materiality session that you have planned for May 7th and 8th.
Yep. And if you sign up for that workshop, we will have 2 folks from Innovation Center in the room. So I actually did just this morning ask Jennifer to move to Madison in an email. So we're very grateful for partnership.
And if you like Eric from the Innovation Center better than you like Jennifer, he'll be there in person. So you can see Eric.
Yeah. Okay, last question I have on my end. And we'll answer this one really quickly, is I received a request from a customer to start collecting data. I haven't done that yet, and I haven't done a materiality assessment. Do I need to try and rush through a materiality assessment first? Maybe Sushil, maybe you're our closing thoughts on this.
Yeah, firstly, do not rush into materiality, like I would say right at the beginning. Because materiality is would give you it's the extensive process and gives you breadth on the topics that are important for you. But say if your customer is asking just as an example, because predominantly that's what is being asked, so GHG information or your greenhouse gas inventory, you could, either if you have resources, or you could talk to any consultant that they may help you doing that exercise. So yeah, you do not really need to do a materiality to provide any information to your customer. So in plain and one sentence.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm gonna kick it over back to our fearless leader, Grace, to close this off.
All right, thank you all for the If you missed anything that you wanted to make sure you caught, we will send out a link to the recording, as well as a whole list of helpful resources and contacts after this webinar concludes later this week. So please watch for that in your email. If you registered for this webinar on our website, you will get that follow-up email. So keep an eye out for that. Danica mentioned our upcoming sustainability or materiality assessment workshop on May 7th and 8th. That is live on our website. Also live on our website right now is our next WCMA member only webinar. That one's going to be a safety spotlight. We're going to focus on products to prevent slips, trips, and falls. And we'll do that on Tuesday, April 9th at 1 p.m. Central. Registration for that webinar is open now at wischeesemakers.org/events. Thank you again so much for joining us today. We will see you on our next webinar.